Today we're going to look at how to draft poetry. To start off with, we need to figure out what makes poetry good. Well, for one, good poetry is emotionally engaging. What I mean by that is that your target audience feels something as they're reading your poem. They're entertained by it and they enjoy it. And for them to be emotionally engaged in your poem, you need to be as well. Secondly, like all good writing, good poetry conveys a message. There's something that you want the reader to understand or feel after they've finished reading your poem. Finally, good poetry uses concise and powerful language that paints a picture in the mind of the reader. So where do poets get their ideas for poetry? The short answer, everywhere. A slightly longer answer is by looking at the things that are important to them. Their passions and interests, for example. There are lots of poems written about discrimination or climate change, about art or music, the things that are important to you. Poets also use their experiences and try and capture individual moments, childhood memories, spending time with your friends, the image of sunlight on the water, the feeling you get when you wake up and you realize it's a holiday and you don't have to go to school or work. And there are certain major topics and emotions that many poets talk about. These are things like change, dreams, love, joy, loss, hope. These are fairly common topics in poetry. The question then is, how do I turn an idea into a poem? Well, in a moment, I'm going to demonstrate writing poetry for you, but there are a few tips and tricks that I can give you as we move through this. Think about what the topic means to you. You might brainstorm ideas or images or words. You might note down lines or sentences. Do a free write, and then take that brainstorming and try and put it together into a poem. The thing you need to remember, though, is that this is a draft. The point is not to find the perfect words or the perfect line breaks. The point is just to get words down on the paper. You'll have a chance to revise later, and honestly, not all of your poems are going to be worth revising. We're practicing right now. Just write. I'm actually going to demonstrate two poems for you. The first one was a little dark, so I wanted to do something that was a little more positive with the second one. I started this poem on Sunday, and out behind my place is a park, and usually you hear kids playing there loudly with like air horns and screams as they play soccer. And this Sunday it was silent. So that's where I started. That's where the idea came from. And then again, like I've said, the point is to get words on the paper. So I started off really simply, just there is silence where the children's voices used to be. And I'm trying to paint this picture so that people can feel what I felt and hear what was missing. Poetry split into lines and stanzas. And stanzas are sort of like paragraphs in prose. And they're marked off by that space that I left in between at the park near my place and within these four walls. In a sense, a stanza is like a more significant break or a more significant pause. So I'll talk about the stanzas that I wrote at the end where I can show you all three of them. I'm hesitating here because, like I said, I'm writing about the pandemic to a certain extent, but I also want it to be a little more open. And I keep struggling with the idea of, is the pandemic he or she or it? By using he, I can create this image of the possibility of a person, but I'm not sure that it's perfect. The thing is, though, I don't need to know. This is a draft. All I need to do is get the words on paper. So yeah, I paused probably a little bit longer than I really should have, but then I kept writing. I've put presses and down on two separate lines because I want to sort of emphasize those ideas. And that's the thing about line breaks. Line breaks are meant to emphasize certain points or certain images or certain words. So I have these 3 stanzas here. The first one sort of describes the situation. The second one describes my emotions. And then the third one, it kind of leads the question. And then I have a draft title that I'm not wild about, but I'll do for now. So the second poem that I wrote, like I said, I wanted it to be a little bit more cheerful. And this actually, it was a part of a song that I was listening to. Not exactly phrased like this, but it was an idea that kind of struck me, so I wanted to explore it in my poetry. So I had to think a little bit about what the idea of living it meant. If living it is how our life is great, okay, so what does that mean? So I came up with these 3 ideas. I like 3. I have a hard time with poetry when I'm writing it anyway, where it's just 2 different ideas. So I've got to stand still, to stay back, and hide away. After that sort of negative sentence, we are not made, I wanted to do something that was a little more affirmative. So don't do this, but instead do these things. Those 2 metaphors, reach for the brightest star, climb the highest mountain, they're fairly well used. So I might try and think of something a little more creative a little bit later. But again, the point of this is just to get the words down on the paper. Much like with the silence poem, I wanted to emphasize the idea of dare, of that action, of taking reasonable chances and not letting other people convince you that you should live your life a certain way. I came into this as I was writing it. I had the idea of what the message I wanted it to be, which was very much inclined towards you need to figure out what's right for you and what your world and your life should look like, and then you need to go and do that. I should note, even though this poem is 3 stanzas and the previous poem was 3 stanzas, that actually a lot of my poetry is all 1 stanza, or maybe 2 or more. It just is coincidental that they are 3. And again, this one ends with what you should do, what the message overall is for the poem.